History is a story we tell ourselves to make sense of the chaos, a neat, linear progression of cause and effect. But this story is a lie. In the year 1347, a great pestilence fell upon the known world. It was a shadow that devoured cities, a phantom that emptied kingdoms. We call it the Black Death. We are taught that it was a bacterium, Yersinia pestis, carried by fleas on the backs of rats. A random, horrifying act of nature. This is the comfortable, sanitized version of the truth. Because in that same year, an unrecorded comet passed perilously close to the Earth. It was not a harbinger of the plague. It was the source. What fell upon our world was not a disease. It was a seed. In 1347, humanity did not nearly die. It was selected. The numbers are staggering, almost impossible to comprehend. In less than 5 years, the Gilded Plague, as it was then known, wiped out as much as 50% of Europe's population. 200 million souls erased. It was a filter on a planetary scale, a brutal, agonizing crucible that burned away the chaff of the human race. And those who survived were not merely lucky. They were changed. Obscure chronicles, buried in monasteries from Ireland to Italy, speak of anomalies the official histories ignore. They describe a fine, shimmering dust that coated the morning dew for weeks. They report survivors whose eyes, once brown or blue, now held flecks of pure gold. Most disturbingly, they describe a newfound clarity, a terrifying, cold logic that replaced grief. The survivors saw the world not as a tragedy to be mourned, but as a system to be rebuilt, a system to be controlled. This was the birth of a new subspecies, hidden in plain sight. They would call themselves the Nox Morte, the children of the death. The plague rewrote the very code of life for a select few. But to understand the terrifying power they unlocked, we must look not to the annals of medicine, but to the secret archives of the Vatican, where a single, terrified monk chronicled the birth of the first Nox Morte. His name was Brother Valerius. He documented how the initial survivors, no more than 1% of the population, began to find one another. It was not through any spoken word, but an instinct, a recognition, a shared frequency in a world gone silent. They did not seek power in the conventional sense. They had no interest in crowns or thrones. Their ambition was infinitely greater. They understood, with a clarity no ordinary human could possess, that the mutagen was incomplete. It was a lock, waiting for a key. And so, they began their great work, the shaping of human civilization for a singular purpose. The Renaissance was their first grand experiment. They didn't paint the masterpieces or sculpt the marble themselves. They simply funded the genius. They identified the key minds, the Da Vincis, the Galileos, the Brunelleschis, and provided the quiet patronage, the impossible-to-get materials, the spark of an idea whispered in a quiet room. They guided humanity towards the stars, long before we even knew to look up. Every leap forward, in astronomy, in physics, in biology, was a carefully placed stepping stone on a path 7 centuries long. They needed humanity to build the tools they would one day require. They sculpted the modern world to prepare for a future only they could see. But this long game had a deadline. For the celestial messenger that first delivered their gift was scheduled to return. And this time, it wouldn't just be carrying dust. In 2009, a Caltech doctoral student named Eris Thorne was running deep-level genomic sequencing on pre-Columbian mummies. It was a low-priority project, a dusty corner of academia. He was looking for patterns in ancient diseases. What he found was impossible. A highly complex, non-coding gene sequence present in approximately 1.5% of the modern European population that was completely absent in every single sample dated before the 15th century. It appeared in the human genome abruptly, with no evolutionary precursor. It was like finding a fully formed microprocessor embedded in a medieval tapestry. Thorne spent the next decade of his life secretly tracing the scythe sequence. He discovered that every living carrier was a direct descendant of a small handful of individuals who had lived through the Black Death. He thought he had stumbled upon the ultimate genetic key to survival, a key that could unlock immunities to modern diseases. He published his initial findings. The paper was met with academic ridicule, but it was not ignored. Not by everyone. Thorne believed he had discovered a historical genetic anomaly. He had no idea he had just painted a target on his back. Because the scythe sequence wasn't just a marker, it was an antenna, waiting for a signal. That signal was now fast approaching. Comet Lysithea. Its 742-year orbit was bringing it back into the inner solar system. For the Nox Morte, the wait was almost over. Their preparations were precise, invisible, and absolute. A series of seemingly unconnected events began to ripple across the globe. A global shipping conglomerate rerouted its entire fleet away from major Pacific routes, citing solar flare predictions. A new, experimental deep space communication array in the Atacama Desert, built by a reclusive tech billionaire, suddenly went online. Thorne, now disgraced and on the run after a series of fabricated accusations destroyed his career, began to see the pattern. He realized the Scythe sequence carriers weren't just immune. Their entire biology operated on a different level. Their cells processed energy more efficiently, their neurons fired faster, but the sequence itself, it was dormant, a machine waiting to be switched on. Hacking into the array's data stream, he saw the truth. The comet wasn't just emitting gas and dust. It was broadcasting a complex, structured signal embedded in a wave of exotic particles, a signal that resonated at the exact quantum frequency of the Scythe sequence. The signal wasn't coming from space to Earth. It was an answer, a response to a call made 7 centuries ago. And as the first wave of the comet's transmission washed over the planet, Thorne finally understood. The plague was never the curse. Humanity was the cocoon. But what emerges from a cocoon? A butterfly or something else entirely? For 700 years, the Nomax Morte believed they were the inheritors of a divine gift, the next stage of human evolution. But was their great work a path to ascension? Or was it just fattening the flock for the slaughter? The first wave is propagating perfectly, Elara, a technician reports. Phase 1 activation will be complete within the hour. Elara, the matriarch, smiles faintly. Centuries of waiting, she whispers, and it is more beautiful than the scriptures described. But Silas isn't watching the globe. He's watching her. The scriptures also speak of change, he says, his voice low and urgent. They speak of shedding the mortal coil. We always interpreted that as metaphor, as transcendence. What if we were wrong? Silas presses. What if the purpose of the Scythe sequence isn't to elevate us but to reformat us? To turn 1.5% of the human race into living receivers for whatever intelligence is riding that comet? Elara turns to him, her golden eyes cold. You sound like a heretic, old friend. This is our birthright, the reward for our stewardship. Thorne was a geneticist, not a cryptographer, but he saw the patterns. The signal wasn't just a simple activation key. It was a program, a vast, complex piece of biological code being downloaded directly into the DNA of over 120 million people. And he found something else, a flaw. Deep within the elegant, almost artificial structure of the Scythe sequence was a single, corrupted packet of data, a tiny string of genes that looked older, more human. It was a ghost in the machine. Was it a mistake? A mutation over 700 years? Or was it something else? The activation wasn't violent. It was subtle, a quiet rewriting of the soul. Scythe carriers found themselves thinking faster, seeing connections they'd never seen before, feeling a strange, collective hum just at the edge of their hearing. They felt like they were waking up from a long dream. They had no idea they were the dream itself. And the dreamer was fast approaching. He realized it was a failsafe, an emergency stop, planted there from the very beginning. But how to trigger it? The signal from the comet was like a tsunami, overwhelming everything. He needed a counterfrequency, something that could broadcast to every carrier on the planet and trigger the failsafe before the metamorphosis was complete. Elara dismisses him with a wave of her hand. It is the cost of becoming gods, Silas. Do not let fear cloud your judgment on the very day of our triumph. Her own eyes are shining now, brighter than before. She feels the hum. It feels like victory. The failsafe required a biological transmitter. It needed a human nervous system to generate the precise, complex resonance pattern. But not just any human. The broadcast would be fatal to the host. The sheer energy required would burn them out from the inside. And there was one more impossible condition. To generate the pure, unaltered counterfrequency, the biological host couldn't have even a trace of the Scythe sequence in their genome. Not the active sequence, not the dormant markers, not the recessive echoes that had filtered through the global population for centuries. The circuit breaker needed a clean signal. It needed a control group. To save the cocoon, Thorne had to find a true human. And he had a sickening feeling that after 700 years of hidden history, there weren't any left. But as his search algorithms scoured global genetic databases, a desperate, last-ditch effort, he found an anomaly, a ghost in a world of ghosts. It wasn't an individual. It was a cluster, a small, statistically impossible pocket of humanity, with genomes so clean they might as well have been from a pre-plague era. And the location chilled him to the bone. They were at the heart of the beast, the Nodex Morte Command Center. The irony was staggering. The ultimate Cthulhu-esque plot twist. Why were they clean? For centuries, the inner circle of the Nodex Morte had practiced a ruthless form of genetic apartheid. They saw themselves as shepherds, not sheep. To them, the scythe sequence was a tool to manage their flock, a gift they bestowed but never partook in themselves. Their purity was a mark of their divine right to rule. They had no idea they were accidentally preserving the failsafe, a control group for an experiment they didn't even understand. Eris Thorn had to somehow get a message to matriarch Elara, the woman who had started all this. He had to convince the architect of the apocalypse that she was humanity's only remaining savior. But would a god ever consent to becoming a sacrifice? He had no choice. He compressed his findings and sent the desperate plea. But as the data packet shot across the globe, a new, colder horror began to dawn. What if the failsafe wasn't a failsafe at all? What if it was bait? Back in the Nox Morte Command Center, an alarm blared. Not on the main screen, but on an ancient, isolated server terminal that hadn't been active in decades. Silas whirled around. What is that? Elara didn't even turn, her eyes fixed on the global map, a faint, golden aura now visible around her head. An echo from a dead system. Ignore it. But Silas didn't ignore it. His blood ran cold. Thorn's failsafe wasn't a circuit breaker designed to save the carriers. It was the missing piece of the puzzle. The comet's signal was the engine. The scythe sequence was the vehicle. And this, pure, human DNA, was the key needed to turn the ignition. It wasn't meant to stop the process. It was meant to perfect it. Silas shoves the ancient terminal in front of Elara, the screen illuminating the raw terror on his face. Elara, look, it's not an ascension. It's an assimilation. The words, host integration key, pulse in a menacing crimson. For a moment, she doesn't react, her face a mask of divine indifference. The hum is a symphony in her mind, drowning out his pleas. That is the sound of our final evolution, Silas. Do not fear it. It's not our evolution, it's its! Thorn didn't send a failsafe, he sent it the final command. The hum in the command center rises to a deafening shriek. Consoles spark and shatter as raw power from the comet begins to channel directly into the room, arcing like miniature lightning towards Elisura. She floats an inch off the ground, her arms slightly raised, a conduit for a cosmic horror. Silas stumbles back, shielding his eyes from the glare. Elara, it's devouring you. It's devouring everyone. Is this the legacy you wanted? A silent galaxy wearing the faces of your children? His words, a desperate final plea, seemed to strike a chord deep beneath the layers of alien code. For a fleeting moment, the serene goddess vanishes, and the woman returns. A flicker of absolute terror crosses Elara's face. She sees it now. Not ascension. A billion minds screaming as they are overwritten by a single, hungry consciousness. The cosmic entity senses her hesitation. The golden light around her constricts, trying to force the integration, to cement its hold. Her body arches in unimaginable pain, a silent scream on her lips. She looks at Silas, her eyes now pools of liquid gold, but in their depths, he sees a final, human choice being made. She was meant to be the broadcast antenna, the key that unlocked a billion souls for her new master. Instead, she becomes the ground wire. With a final, defiant roar that is both human and something terrifyingly more, Elara pulls all the channeled energy, all the power of the comet's signal, into herself. From his observatory, a world away, Thorn watches the global energy network flicker violently and die. The monstrous red wave from the comet shatters against an invisible wall, its connection severed. The signal goes silent. He stares at the dark, empty screen, whispering, "She chose." The Nox Morte Command Center is a ruin of molten metal and shattered rock, open to the freezing mountain air. In the center of the devastation, there is nothing, not even ash. Silas pulls himself up, bruised and bleeding, looking at the empty space where Elara made her stand. The world is finally, terrifyingly, quiet. They were saved, not by a hero or a failsafe, but by the last, defiant act of a villain who refused to become a tool. Humanity was left with a shattered gift, a broken history, and a second chance it never deserved. The dream was over. It was time to wake up. What happens next is a story for another time. To explore the fallout and discover what rises from the ashes, make sure you subscribe to the channel. Don't miss the future of ChronoShift.